We are into mock season. How does one analyze mocks? I'm going to discuss it in 2 points of view, 2 different ways. One is the strategy, the tactical ideas of what is the takeaway from mock taking. That is, how do I plan my actual 2-hour schedule better? Other is the learning aspect that we'll come to later on. And so this, how do I plan? A bunch of takeaways. I'm going to put this into 3 buckets. First one is question selection. It is super important. Question selection is absolutely crucial. When you're taking a mock, apart from the learning part and apart from thinking about percentages and para jumble and Venn diagram, you're thinking about how well can my decision making improve. Decision making, if I had to make it stand on one thing, it is very clearly question selection, nothing else. Fine. So I have a very nice method for this. For me, every time I take a mock, or I'm asking anybody to take a mock, there's one thing that we do. Each section, find 3 questions that you should not have done that you end up attempting. Each section, 3 questions that you should not have attempted that you ended up attempting. Why this way? Because if you attempt a question that is difficult, there's a bigger price to pay than if you leave a question that is easy. And so nobody can attempt all the questions that are in their sweet spot because there's a time variable. And so you'll always end up taking mocks and you'll feel like at the end of it, I could have done these 2 questions also. But you have to remember that you can do these 2 questions also only if you don't do some questions already sitting there. If all the questions that you have selected to do are the right ones, then that's all you can do. You cannot maximize and do everything. That's not possible. So it's very important to not make this kind of error, to have a stinker that you end up trying. And so lots of founders and entrepreneurs, they're given this advice. They said, look, employee recruitment and hiring and retention is a painful process. You cannot always get it right, but make sure that you don't have bad apples coming in. You don't get the best resources all the time, that's all right. But you have a few bad resources, they can kill the whole mahal, mood, culture, everything. And so similarly, the same idea, same parallel. If you end up attempting questions that you should have stayed away from, you're in trouble. So you have to make sure that your question selection improves iteratively. Or one beautiful mechanism to do this is to say, hey, every time I look at a section, I'm going to say, these 3, I shouldn't have tried. I ended up trying. I'll keep a marker for this. Anything from speed, time, distance, I'm skipping. Sentence elimination, not my cup of tea. Venn diagram, I thought I was a king, but I'm not. And you'll revisit each of these hypotheses, but that's takeaway that you have to have for question selection or question skipping. Second thing is question sequence. Right? So should you do these, should you have tried these 10 questions in the first order? This is very closely linked to this. Right? We often have questions that we want to try straight away and then come back to later on. For me, for quant is my sweet spot. If I know the method and I know it's a juicy method, I'm going for it. If I know the method, but if it's time consuming, I'm coming to it later on. If I can't figure out the method, I'm leaving. So every question I'm taking yes, no, later. That's my decision. All my laters I'll come on later on. So every time we take this, every time we look at questions, you're saying, yes, I'm trying it, doing it now. Or no, I'm not touching it at all. Later I'll come back to it. So you'll have to say, am I doing my right questions? Am I doing my best questions first? Because then my juiciest attempts will come first. That is question sequencing. Am I doing RC first and then verbal next, VA next? Or am I doing RC, VA, RC? Or VA first and then RC later on? That's sequencing. That again is important. Third takeaway from a tactical level, what am I making fatigue errors? Am I getting burnt out at the end of second section? Am I carrying the bad feeling from verbal into LRDI, from LRDI into quant? Am I getting complacent and satiated after a rock star start? So you'll think this is not happening, but this frequently happens. You feel like, look, you're flying. You wanted to start the quant section and you thought, if I attempt 8 questions, I'm the king. And then you see the question is super easy. You end up attempting 10. There's 7 more minutes. Vaguely at 10, you feel good, nice, and waste the last 7 minutes. It happens. It happens that you're too happy with the paper and don't maximize it. Is that happening? So analysis on fatigue errors, elements of complacency, elements of not being intense throughout, elements of slightly switching back, switching off in between, all of that you'll have to address where you say, I'm going to take a deep breath and launch myself all over again. And so these are the things that I would take away from a strategy and element of thinking about the overall 10,000 feet view about the CAT paper. And so then what are the learning elements? And so every time you take a CAT, you take a mock CAT, not a CAT. Every time you take the mock CAT, you will fill some learning gaps. And so super important. Right? The learning gap element is fixed to your linked to your question selection. And every time My first port of call for learning is what have I got wrong? What did I leave? What did I get right? Right? So what have I got wrong? That means did I make this mistake? Have I made a mistake because I have a funda error or because I have a speed error? I made a computation error, I was too fast, I made a mistake. Right? So if it's a funda error, I'll go back to theory and fix that learning gap. To speed error, I'll do a bunch of tests, amp up my speed, reduce my speed deficit. So that's the way I'm looking at it. So the learning gap, funda error or speed error, I'll have to address that, figure that out. If I'm having funda errors, I'll go and learn that and bridge that gap. If I'm having speed errors, then I'll go and do tons of practice and bridge that gap. For questions where I'm conceptually sound, for topics where I'm conceptually sound, but I'm not that quick, I'll come back to that later on. I'm not doing that in my first iteration. For where I'm funda wise, I'm weak, then it doesn't matter. I should be dropping those questions. So this will reinforce your decision making ideas when you're doing the learning part. It's super important to have the learning part feedback into decision making and boost either funda or speed depending on what you take away from that question. Incorrect ones come first, questions that you have skipped come next, and then the ones that you have got right. Whenever you're filling a learning gap, if you're doing this in July, August, maybe till first half of September, then look to learn. But potentially later on, you can say, look, trigonometry, I'm not touching this. I'm never going to be comfortable with trigonometry. I'm never going to be super happy doing trigonometry questions. So I'm not ever filling the trigonometry learning gap. I'm dumping trigonometry as a topic. You can take that decision. All of us will have to take that decision as we go closer to the exam and tell no point working ourselves up for potentially 1.5 questions that come from that topic. Leave it and carry on. So that is part of the decision making matrix, but not in July, not in August, maybe September, October. Final part, we have to dive down into a section level. What are my takeaways for verbal? What are my takeaways for LRDA? What are my takeaways for quant? And I'm going to focus on what is the most likely error that there. In verbal, very often I make two mistakes. One, whenever I have time pressure, whenever I'm chasing something, whenever I'm stressed, I start reading too quickly for my own good. So I rattle away and read fast. I read a paragraph, but I'm not registered anything. And this happens whenever I'm stressed. When I'm leisure reading, I hardly ever read fast. And your natural speed of reading is what it is. You cannot gobble up paragraphs just because you want to read quickly. So check for that. If your eyes are glazing across a paragraph, then you're stress reading too quickly. Very often we blame ourselves for reading too slowly. It's not too slowly, it's too quickly, in trouble, not understanding anything, therefore rereading, which makes it look like too slowly. So address that, read at your natural pace, you'll still have time. And second mistake, again, it's linked to fatigue, is I'll boil it down to two choices, B or C. And then once I've come to B or C, I'll say between B or C, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it'll not work, mark B and go. I'm not spending that extra half a minute reading B again, reading C again and saying, one of these two fellows is wrong. There is something in the passage that eliminates one of these two. Something is being overstated, something is being implied that I shouldn't be taking for granted. Some assumption is flawed, and cancelling that and confidently marking the other one. I don't even resolve. I'm tired, I want to mark B, tell myself, one out of 5, eliminated two choices, this should work, and then go on to the next question. So that can happen. So you have to figure out whether those kind of errors are happening. These are my big two errors. There could be some for you. You have to find that and simplify that. LRDI, the elephant in the room for this is question selection. And so which puzzle are you selecting first? Very often we think that question selection is the ball game. Question selection is important. Bouncing back from wrong choices is even more important. It is super difficult to select the right puzzles. I find so many people coming and saying in slot 2, these two are the best to select. You do it, you can get 10 questions right. That takes you to 99.7. So difficult to select those two as the first two sets you will solve in that exam paper in that context. Super tough. They don't obviously look as easy. And after you have tried for 3 minutes with the other set that you saw was juicy is when you realize that set is tough. And so you should have better and better mechanism to tell yourself, this is my sweet spot. I like math kind of puzzles. I like Venn diagram. I like anything with counting. I like anything with ratios. Yeah, that works for me. I don't like anything with too many charts, too many numbers. That doesn't work for me. Having that mechanism is super useful. Gravitating towards better selection is super useful. Also important and super crucial is to bounce back. Okay, I made this wrong choice. 6 minutes into this, dump this. Okay, I can still crack this section and come back. That ability you have to build. Every time you're in a mock, you have to tell yourself, I'm not giving up on this mock. So many times when you're taking a mock, you'll feel like verbal went well, LRDA is crashed, my percentile will crash anyway. This mock, like this performance, I'm not clearing LRDA section cutoff. Screw quant, I'm not even writing this mock. You'll never say that. You'll sit there and say, let me get 0 in LRDI, I will still hang in there for quant. That's your most important takeaway. Quant, my entire focus for the mock cycle is to hit 100% accuracy. And I feel so many people saying, in quant I have 60% accuracy. So I immediately feel like asking, so if you write 5 questions, you're getting 2 of them wrong. How do you select which 2? And so there's an old joke where you say, look, the guy who's a wonderful marksman, and somebody says, you have to hit 3 out of 5, I'll give you an award. And he says, he pauses. And then they ask him, why are you afraid? He'll say, no, I'm worried where I'll put the other 2. He's confident of hitting 5 out of 5. He's a marksman. And so I sometimes don't understand 60% accuracy. It sounds like I'm being very cocky. If it's 60% accuracy, out of every 5 questions, you're saying, there's every chance I'll get 2 wrong. 2 out of 5 wrong, you'll have to take an effort. You have to select these 2, I'll get wrong. Then only you can get it wrong. In quant, you find the answer, you mark the choice, or you enter in theta. So you have to be super anal about accuracy and say, why did I put 4.2? What was my thought process? I didn't get it right, I should have left it. Why was there not a red flag which said, the answers are 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm getting 4.2. Why did I mark 4? I can't. I've got something wrong. So you've got to work on accuracy as like the philosophical thing, saying I'm never letting go of accuracy, at least in quant, then to the other 2 sections as well. So that's the holy grail. The biggest distinguishing factor for success in quant is accuracy. If you can get to 100% accuracy, your score will fly. So be very particular about everything that you've gotten wrong. If you're caught out by a question, you walked into a trap, that happens to the best of us. That's a question setter's genius. Correct. Done. If there is fatigue, look, I thought I did this right, but I seem to have multiplied 8 into 7 and put 64. That can happen. But otherwise, you're being silly and you're kidding yourself into thinking that you're error proof when you're not. Right? So keep that in mind. This is broad themes while doing mock. None of these videos are as helpful or 10% as helpful as taking 3 mocks and just sitting through that. The idea of building stamina, gritting through it, not giving up in between, getting beaten up by a mock and still hanging in there will never come with listening to all this. Go jump in, get smacked. Doesn't matter how many mocks you get smacked by, but do that cycle, come out the other side, then your scores will improve. Best wishes.